Hi, I'm Mark Gaylor, Sony Global Imaging Ambassador. I'd like to take the opportunity to walk you through the camera settings I'll be using on my A7R III to shoot action, wildlife and sports. Now we'll start by switching the camera mode to aperture priority. Now I'll start off by using an aperture of f5.6. We can of course go wider if the lens permits, but we shouldn't stop down more than f8. There is a note in the camera manual indicating why this is a problem for action photography, and I'll take you to the page here and highlight where it says that we're basically going to lock the focus setting on the first frame if we're shooting on apertures smaller than f8, i.e. f11 or f16. Now f11 is possible on the A9 but not possible on the A7R III. F8 is pretty much the maximum aperture we can shoot with most alpha cameras other than the A9. Okay, so I've dived into the menus and you can see that I'm in the Camera 1 tab. Now you'll be able to keep a track on where I am in the menus by looking just down here. This shows you that I'm in tab 1 of 14 in this first camera menu system here. You can also see where I'm positioned in the menus by looking down at the orange button just as it moves right across through the tabs. This will help you follow along with your own camera. Okay, so let's take a look at the first of the menu settings, and that is file format. Now I choose RAW. This gives me a little bit more latitude in processing, and the camera buffer on the A7R III allows me to shoot in RAW without slowing up the camera. Now I'm going to be choosing also the compressed RAW file format rather than uncompressed. There is a note in the camera manual to say that the continuous shooting becomes slower when we set the file format to uncompressed. So remember, use the compressed RAW file format if you need extra frames per second. Now the drive mode, you'll see that I've walked forward to the third camera tab now. I'm setting the drive mode to continuous shooting. Okay, the continuous shooting, if I just press the enter button there, I'm going to go in, I'm going to be able to select high from the menus. Now high plus will give you actually a greater number of frames per second, but you don't get a live view on the LCD panel or the EVF to enable you to track smoothly. There is going to be some lag there, so I do recommend just going back to the high setting. Okay, and again there's a note in the camera manual there. In fact, all of the information, important information about action sports, wildlife is all contained on one single note. I think it's on page 37 or something, and it's saying that the subject is not displayed in real time on the EVF or the LCD screen if we choose high plus. Now if we choose high, that is going to lower the frames per second. We're going to be able to shoot in 8 rather than 10 frames per second, but it does give you that live view tracking. Okay, we're coming through the bottom of that third tab. You'll see that there is an option to put these settings into a memory, but we need to put in quite a few more settings before we revisit this tab and load all of these into one of the 3 memories that we can recall on the shooting mode dial. So okay, so let's move forward and dial in those settings now. Okay, select media. Now for a rapid writing of the files to the memory card, you should really have your fastest card in slot 1. That's the lower of the 2 slots. Now I would invest in a very fast memory card, an SDXC2, and this with a very high fast read-write speed is going to clear the camera buffer to the card, which will enable you to do subsequent bursts of shooting. Okay, so we're moving forward to the 5th tab now, and you can see that my priority setting AFC is balanced emphasis. Okay, so focus area, I'm choosing to go in and choose my focus area as lock on AF. Now there are a number of options with Lock On AF. I typically restrict myself just to two of those options. Lock On AF Expand Flexible Spot. I'm going to be using the joystick there to move the spot around the screen, and this will start where the AF starts tracking and locking onto my subject. When the subject becomes too erratic and I can't put that flexible spot on the subject to start the tracking, I will switch over to Lock On AF Wide. Now with this wide option, there is another wide focus area option, and I'll just show you that one. It's the focus area wide. Just avoid this one if you're wanting the camera to lock on and track across the frame. Okay, so the one you're going to want is the Lock On AF Wide and Lock On AF Expand Variable Spot. Okay, set face priority in AF. You can get the camera to pick up a face and then track that face across the screen. Now sometimes you might want to switch the face priority off, okay, because if you're focusing your attention on a moving vehicle, not somebody in the crowd, you do want you do want to lock on without the face priority switched to on. Okay, now this has been broken up into two sub menus for the A7R3, and you want to come down and switch the face detect frame display on and also the face priority in AF on. Okay, now we can toggle between the face detection on and off. We can set up an option in the menu, the function menus, to be able to toggle that on very quickly without having to come back into the menu system. Okay, just to highlight this is I've got two faces coming towards me at approximately 30 to 40 kilometers an hour. Now the camera will pick up both of the faces. You can just see the display face option has picked up both faces. Now when I press IAF, I'll typically have that assigned to my focus hold button on the lens. It's going to pick up the eye or the face that's nearest the focus point if I'm using the expand variable spot. As you can see in this instance, the focus point was nearest the girl on the scooter, and so it's picked up her eye. If, however, I was to raise the focus point higher in the frame and then press my focus hold button, which instigates my IAF, it's going to pick up the face of the adult behind the young girl. Okay, so that's quite a useful feature if you are looking to lock on and track with a face. Okay, AF track sensitivity. Now the standard is 3, but if you've got to be very, very faithful to a particular subject, maybe you've got 10 football players and you really just want to track one, even if you lose that subject momentarily behind another player, you do want to lower that number to the locked on 1 option. If, however, the any of the football players will do, and you want the most reliably sharp one, then you're going to increase the responsiveness maybe up as high as 5 to switch to a better target. Okay, so that's your choice, going between 1 and 5, and if you're not too sure which of those you want, just leave it at the 3, which is the default standard. Okay, AF with shutter. Okay, so this is for back button AF users. If you want to quickly set the camera to back button AF, and there is an AF on button now on the A7R3, just as with the A9, all you need to do is go into AF with shutter and switch it off, and then you instantly have back button AF on the A7R3. Okay, so there is an AF3 panel. I don't have time in this movie to look at one of the most important features in the AF3, which is AF area registration. You can quickly switch between AF areas, such as I would want to switch between expand variable spot into wide lock on AF. You can trigger that with a single press of a custom button, either holding the custom button or toggling a custom button. And I've made a separate movie that is on my Alpha Creative Skills YouTube channel. panel that covers just that feature. Okay, ISO, we're now on the 9th tab in camera 1. ISO is set to auto. Okay, just enter the auto and come across, press the right of the control wheel, and then you'll be able to come in and set the maximum ISO available to the camera. Now, I would encourage you to raise this on a full frame camera such as the A7R3 or A9, because the camera can deal with very high ISO settings. It's much better for me to choose a higher ISO rather than having the shutter speed slow down and having some movement blur. Okay, so ISO auto minimum shutter speed. Now this is the setting that means that I can use aperture priority rather than shutter priority. Aperture priority will often just default to a shutter speed that will avoid camera shake in your hands, but this doesn't stop movement blur of a fast moving subject. So we can go into this menu setting, move it from standard to fast to faster. That doubles and quadruples the minimum shutter speed. But if you're working with maybe sports or very fast moving subjects, you want to come into this menu and set the minimum shutter speed to 1,000th of a second or minimum, sometimes 2,000th or 4,000th of a second, depending on how rapidly your subject is moving. Okay, we're on the 10th panel now, AEL with shutter. Now that's the automatic exposure lock. Now the exposure lock will be locked on to the exposure for the first frame if that is in the on position. Now if you want the exposure to vary, say your subject is running from sunlight into shadows, then you want to switch that automatic exposure lock to the off position. And again, this is probably one of those features you want to be able to assign to the custom menu. That's the star here, okay, so that you can access that quickly, so you don't have to go hunting for this option in the menus. Okay, so silent shooting, this is the electronic shutter. Now the A9 shoots its rapid burst 20 frames per second on the electronic shutter, but the A9 sensor is significantly different to the A7R3 sensor, and I would definitely recommend shooting high frame rates on the mechanical shutter rather than the electronic shutter. Okay, so another feature there that you want to make sure is in the on position is the E front curtain shutter. Now this needs to be in the on position, and again, going back to that camera manual, you'll see that the shooting speed during continuous shooting becomes slower when E front curtain shutter is set to off in continuous shooting. Okay, so just remember to leave that in the on position. Steady shot. Now steady shot is primarily designed for removing camera shake, okay, but when we're rapidly moving the camera to track a subject, steady shot can work against us in certain instances. So this needs to be either set to off, but with many sports lenses we can actually switch this off on the lens if needs be. Now, if you are panning with the camera and you are leaving steady shot on, you should put the mode, the stabilization mode, to mode 2 when panning. Otherwise, mode 1 will work against you. Okay, so we're coming up to the, we're on the second panel now, and we have been for the last couple of options. We're going over to continuous shoot length on the panel 7. Now we can get an indication of how much buffer we have left. This might encourage us to back off shooting if we want to save some of the camera buffer for another piece of action that will unfold shortly. Now you can have that always displayed or just displayed when shooting. Now that display will appear as a vertical white bar on the left side of the frame, and as we're reducing the available camera buffer to shoot more shots, that white line will continue to get shorter and shorter, and if we lose that white line altogether, the camera will stop shooting while it clears some of the buffer. So this is a great feature to make sure that we're leaving enough available buffer for the next piece of action that will unfold. Okay, so we're on the 8th tab of camera 2. This is where we can set up some of the custom keys on the camera, and we have plenty of custom keys on the A7R3 to set those up for changes that we need to make very quickly without coming into the function menu, without coming into the camera menus. Now, one of these that you might want to assign, one of the ones that I've assigned, is I've gone over to custom button 1, which by default is set to white balance. Now, I'm an auto white balance shooter, so I don't really need to access this quickly at all. So I'm going to override custom button 1 and set that to another option that I will be changing quite often. Now, if we press the enter button on the control dial, we're going to come into that white balance, and you'll see that it's positioned in 11 of 23 panels. And what we need to do is roll back, go to the left and come to panel 7 there. And this will allow you to change that custom key setting from white balance to ISO auto minimum shutter speed. So if 1/1000th of a second isn't enough to freeze the rapidly moving action, I can quite quickly press that custom key and move that up to 2000th or 4000th of a second. Okay, another couple of things that we might want to access quickly, we can put in the function menu. This is action by pressing the FN button just above the control dial. And one of the, or two of the ones that I might put in there is, if you're not assigning that custom key, I would definitely put it into the function menu. Okay, many of the default FN menus are surplus to requirement. Like, we have exposure compensation, which we really don't need because we have an exposure compensation dial on the top of the camera. So we've got plenty of FN options to override here. Another one that you might want to assign is, and one that I've assigned, is on the lower section. I have access to that APS-C mode. This allows me to magnify the view of my lens by 50%, so my 100-400 lens becomes a 600mm telephoto if the subject is a little bit far away. Admittedly, I will drop from 42.4 megapixels to 18 megapixels, but it does allow me to frame the subject and track that very quickly at a distance. Okay, another one that you might want to toggle on and off is that face priority that we discussed earlier. Okay, and that will give you that quick access to switch face priority on and off. Okay, so now we can roll back to that camera 1 on the 3rd tab and dial in all of these settings into the memory bank of the camera. So I'm going to press the center button of the control wheel there, and I'm going to assign this to my 2nd memory there. Now, I've assigned number 1 to my favorite landscape settings in a previous movie, so I'm setting all of these settings for designed for effective and reliable action shooting to my 2nd menu. And as soon as I've done that, the camera will indicate that it's been registered, and then I can quickly dial in all of those settings just by spinning the shoot mode dial round to number 2. And I can quickly modify some of those settings by changing the aperture to f4 or f8. I can change my minimum shutter speed setting from 1000th to 2000th, and this will allow me to freeze action very, very reliably, very quickly, without having to hunt through a series of menu items because I was shooting landscape just 10 minutes before. And so these are my favorite action shots that I've been testing with my new A7R3, rapidly running dogs through shallow water, and I have a very good hit rate with this. Okay, now if you've enjoyed this movie, you'll find me all over social media. You'll also find my website. It's a great learning resource. You don't pay for anything on this website. I have lots of tutorials. I have a very active blog, and I even go into post-production with Lightroom presets and Photoshop actions, and it's all free. Okay, so thumbs up if you've enjoyed the information, and I'll catch you online next time.